The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I opened it. Cream-colored, thick paper, her name etched in cursive gold. It was exactly the kind of invitation Chelsea would send, elegant, dramatic, designed to impress. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. Her engagement dinner, another stage she could stand on while the rest of us clapped. I held it in my hand like it might sting me, because deep down, it already had. Chelsea's name always came with the echo of everything I wasn't. She was the loud one, the one people noticed in a room, the one with the charm that made people lean in. I was the shadow beside her, the quiet one, the sister they forgot to introduce. I told myself I didn't care, but something about that envelope reminded me how many times I'd been expected to show up, smile, and disappear. I debated going. I played out every version of the evening in my head. The polite small talk, the subtle digs, the way she'd tilt her head and ask about my next steps, pretending not to know how far I'd come. But part of me wanted to walk into that room not to prove anything, but to remind myself that I didn't have to hide anymore. I wasn't the Danielle who used to cry in her car after family dinners. I wasn't the girl who had to explain her ambition like it was a flaw. I was more than Chelsea ever gave me credit for. And even if no one else saw it, I had worked too hard, lost too much, and rebuilt too quietly to stay away now. So I went. Not because I was ready to forgive her, but because I was done letting her decide who I was, and I wanted to see for myself what kind of woman she was turning into without the filter of celebration. I arrived 5 minutes early, knowing full well no one would notice. The restaurant was one of those upscale spots with dim lighting and linen napkins folded like swans. Chelsea had chosen it for the aesthetic, no doubt, to match her version of perfection. The hostess barely glanced at me when I gave my name, just pointed toward the private dining room in the back. As I stepped inside, the room buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses. Her fiancé stood near the bar, entertaining a circle of sharply dressed men, his colleagues probably. My parents were already seated, sipping wine, beaming with pride. Chelsea stood at the center like a queen, radiant and rehearsed, her arm looped through Ethan's. When she spotted me, her smile didn't falter, but she didn't move toward me either. She gave a small wave, like I was someone she vaguely recognized, but couldn't quite place. No one looked twice when I took a seat near the end of the table. There were no introductions, no questions about how I'd been or what I was doing. I was just there. The sister. Background noise. I watched as Chelsea flitted from group to group, lighting up each pocket of the room like she was on stage. She leaned in, laughed too loudly, touched arms and shoulders like she'd known these people forever. I'd seen her do it 100 times. It always worked. A cousin passed by and smiled politely. "Hey, Danielle, still between things?" she asked. I didn't respond. She didn't wait for one day. As the dinner wore on, I felt the familiar ache creep in, not the pain of being excluded, but the dull sting of being invisible. They didn't mean to be cruel. That was the part that always hurt the most. It just never occurred to them that I might matter. And Chelsea, she thrived in the silence left in my absence. But this time, I didn't shrink. I didn't fidget. I didn't fold into myself. I sat there, fully present, letting them ignore me, because I knew the silence wouldn't last forever. I wore a navy dress, simple and clean, no flashy jewelry or plunging neckline, just something that made me feel comfortable. I knew it wouldn't measure up to Chelsea's standards. Her outfits were always statements, carefully chosen to dazzle, curated like her life. Mine was chosen to keep me grounded. I walked into that room knowing no one would compliment it. And no one did. But I smiled anyway. Not the brittle smile I used to wear to survive, but a quiet, steady one. The kind that came from knowing who you are when no one else is watching. Dinner unfolded the way I expected, to many toasts, loud conversations, small talk laced with judgment. My mother mentioned Ethan's firm at least 4 times, each one more exaggerated than the last. My father told the story about Chelsea's high school debate championship like it had happened yesterday. Everyone laughed at her jokes, even the mean ones, especially the mean ones. I sat with my hands in my lap, nodding when appropriate, sipping my water slowly. A few people asked surface-level questions, nothing meaningful, Nothing that left room for honesty. It was easier to assume. I had nothing to say at one point. A woman I didn't recognize leaned across the table and asked, "So what do you do?" Her tone was casual, uninterested. Before I could answer, Chelsea cut in with a laugh. "Danielle's probably between jobs again. She floats." More laughter followed. I didn't laugh. I didn't speak. I just met her eyes and smiled that same quiet smile. Inside, something shifted. Not rage, not even sadness, just this calm certainty that I didn't need to play along, that I didn't have to win their approval by shrinking myself. I let the moment pass without defense, without performance. I watched her soak in the attention, needing it like oxygen, and still, I stayed silent, not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew the room would fall quiet soon enough. It happened just as the second course was cleared. Chelsea stood, glass in hand, radiating that easy confidence she wore like perfume. Her laughter rang out across the room, theatrical and bright. She tapped her spoon against the side of her champagne flute and smiled wide, the kind of smile meant for audiences. Everyone quieted down, eyes turning to her like they always did. She thrived in moments like this, when she had the stage and the attention, when people leaned in just to hear her speak. "I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight," she began, tossing her hair back like she was being filmed. "It means so much to share this moment with our favorite people." She looked at Ethan, then back at the crowd, her tone light and performative. "And of course, my sister Danielle's here, probably between jobs again, right?" She laughed, and the room followed, not cruelly but comfortably. The kind of laughter that rises when people are used to a certain story being true. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile either. I felt the warmth rise in my chest, not from embarrassment, but from clarity. That joke, though subtle, wasn't spontaneous. It was planned. She waited for the moment, waited until every eye was on her, until her status was confirmed, until she could remind them all of who she was and who I was. And single quotes It was nothing new. Chelsea had always found ways to reduce me, with humor, with backhanded praise, with carefully timed comments that landed like soft slaps. This one was just louder, and she expected me to take it, like I always did. She expected me to laugh along, to make it easier for everyone else. But I didn't. I sat still, calm. I looked up at her, meeting her gaze, and let the silence after the laughter speak for itself, because something was coming. And she had no idea how quickly the story was about to change. The laughter was still fading when I saw Ethan's expression shift. He had been smiling, his arm draped casually over the back of Chelsea's chair, but something in her words made his face still. His eyes narrowed slightly, then flicked toward me with a different kind of attention, sharper, confused. He sat up straighter, that easy social posture dropping as something clicked in his mind. "Wait," he said, voice cutting into the hum of the room. "You're Danielle Rivers?" I nodded once, slowly, holding his gaze. The room stilled. Not gradually, immediately. The kind of silence that feels physical. Forks hovered midair. Glasses stopped halfway to lips. I could hear someone's bracelet clink softly against the stem of their wine glass. Chelsea blinked fast, as if trying to catch up to a conversation she wasn't invited to. Ethan stood, brow furrowed. "You're Judge Danielle Rivers?" His voice wasn't loud, but the weight of it filled the room. People turned to look at me again, this time with recognition instead of dismissal. The air felt different, heavier, more fragile. I didn't move, didn't explain. I just nodded again. My smile was gone, replaced by something still and steady. "She's the one overseeing the Rackham litigation," Ethan said, almost to himself. "That's my firm's case." Chelsea's face lost all its color. The hand holding her champagne glass trembled, barely noticeable but not hidden. For once, she had no words, no deflection, no performance. Her fiancé looked at her, then back at me, as if seeing both of us for the first time. I didn't gloat. I didn't speak. I just sat in the same chair they'd overlooked earlier, the same simple dress, the same quiet presence. Only now, it wasn't the same room. It wasn't the same Danielle. They thought I came to play a part in their celebration, But I had walked in carrying the truth, and now they were all finally paying attention. For the first time all evening, no one looked at Chelsea. Every pair of eyes, guests, colleagues, even our parents were fixed on me. Not because I said anything. I hadn't moved. I hadn't raised my voice. But the shift had already happened. Clean and undeniable. Ethan stood there, his hand still resting on the back of Chelsea's chair, but he was no longer holding her up. His entire focus had turned toward me, and I watched as the reality of the situation settled into his posture, into the way his jaw clenched and his shoulders tensed. "You're overseeing the case?" he asked again, this time not for confirmation, but for clarity. "Yes," I said, finally. My voice didn't need to be loud. It didn't need to defend itself. It was enough to simply speak the truth. I was recently appointed to the federal bench. There it was, the sentence they had never seen coming. The one Chelsea had spent years pretending couldn't possibly be true. My mother shifted uncomfortably. My father looked down at his drink. And Chelsea, she sat frozen, her perfect smile gone, her cheeks losing every trace of color. She couldn't spin this, couldn't tease her way out of it. The room that once orbited around her now pulsed with the weight of a truth she hadn't prepared for. I didn't add anything more. I didn't need to. Let them sit in it. Let them reckon with all the times they laughed, all the assumptions they held, all the rooms I entered only to be overlooked. They thought they knew who I was because I let them write that story for so long, but I was never going to play the part they cast me in. Chelsea stared at me like she didn't recognize the woman sitting across from her. Maybe she didn't, but this woman? The one who didn't flinch, who didn't chase approval. She had always been there. They just never looked closely enough to see her. The silence stretched out longer than it should have, and in that stillness, I watched every face in the room shift. There was discomfort, confusion, even a little shame, blooming behind the polite expressions. Some people looked at their plates, suddenly more interested in their half-finished meals than the woman they had ignored an hour earlier. Others glanced between Chelsea and me, as if they were recalibrating everything they thought they knew about us. I didn't move. I didn't smirk or straighten my posture to look more important. I simply let it settle. Let them sit in the tension they helped create. It wasn't revenge, I felt it was recognition. For the first time, they weren't seeing me through the filter Chelsea had painted for years. They were seeing me as I was. Not loud, not flashy, but undeniable. One of Ethan's colleagues leaned toward him and whispered something, and I saw. His jaw tightened further. His expression had gone from surprise to calculation, as if he was replaying every conversation he'd ever had about the judge on his firm's case. As if realizing he might have misjudged the entire situation. My mother finally spoke, her voice small. "We didn't know. You never told us." I looked at her, and for once, I didn't feel the urge to soften my truth to make her more comfortable. "You never asked." She blinked, and I could see her searching for something to say, some way to patch over the years of being too distracted by Chelsea's glow to notice who I had become. But no apology came, just silence. Chelsea sat stiffly, her eyes fixed on a spot just past my shoulder. Her mouth was tight, her fingers gripping her napkin so tightly I thought it might tear. The room no longer held her together. It had turned, ever so slightly, toward me, and still, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand attention. I simply existed in the space they once denied me. It turns out you don't need to fight for a spotlight. Sometimes the truth is bright enough on its own. Chelsea was never good with silence, especially not the kind she couldn't control. She was used to filling rooms with her voice, with her charm, with those easy, rehearsed smiles that made people feel lucky to be near her. But that night, her usual tricks faltered. You could see it in her eyes, the panic beneath the poise, the calculation behind the quiet. She sat frozen for a beat too long, then forced a shaky laugh, the kind that tried to carry authority but landed flat. "Well, I guess I always knew she'd do something important," she said, looking around the room like a performer desperate for applause. Danielle's always been the smart one. There it was. The pivot, the quick rewrite of the narrative, a sudden attempt to fold me into her story without acknowledging the years she'd spent cutting me out of it. She reached for her wine, sipped it quickly, then smiled at me like we'd always been sisters who supported each other. But it didn't work. The words didn't land. No one laughed this time. No one nodded along. The room had already changed. It had heard the truth, and no amount of charm could dull it now. I didn't smile back. I didn't return the gesture. I just held her gaze, not with anger, but with something steadier. Something she didn't know how to meet, stillness that didn't require her validation. She tried again, this time to the room. She's so humble too, always keeping things to herself. My father muttered something under his breath. My mother looked like she might cry. Ethan didn't say a word. Chelsea kept talking, kept spinning, but it was too late. The performance had ended, and what was left was her exposed, uncertain, and unable to shape the moment into something that made her look good. For once, I wasn't the one fumbling to belong. She was. By the time dessert was served, I had already decided I wouldn't stay. I didn't need to hear more awkward toasts or watch Chelsea scrape together some version of control. I'd made my point without raising my voice, without shifting in my seat, without trying to prove anything. I had simply arrived as myself and let the truth speak. That was enough. I placed my napkin on the table and stood quietly. A few heads turned, and I met their eyes without flinching. Not out of pride, but out of peace. Ethan rose halfway, caught somewhere between guilt and obligation. "Danielle," he said, his voice quieter now. "I didn't know." "I hope we didn't," he trailed off, unsure how to finish a sentence that wouldn't come clean. I nodded once, letting him off the hook, not because he deserved it, but because I didn't need the apology to move forward. As I turned to leave, my mother reached out. Her hand brushed mine, but she didn't say anything. I wondered if she even knew what to say. She had watched Chelsea take up all the space in every room for years, had encouraged it, had helped build the pedestal. And now, in this one moment, she looked like she wanted to rewind the clock and look a little closer at the daughter who never needed much just to be seen. I walked out without a final word. No grand statement, no parting shots. The quiet was enough. Outside, the air was cool and clear, the night stretching wide in front of me. I walked to my car alone, but I didn't feel lonely. I felt weightless, free of the need to perform, free of the need to belong to a version of family that only loved what it could boast about. Inside, they were still sitting in the roles they'd rehearsed their whole lives, but I was done with the script. I had nothing to prove, and everything ahead of me. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I stood in the quiet, letting the darkness settle around me like a familiar friend. I took off my shoes, set my bag down, and exhaled the last traces of the evening. It wasn't anger that lingered. It wasn't even sadness. It was clarity. A quiet knowing that I had crossed something invisible, some final line between who I used to be and who I was never going back to. I walked to the mirror in the hallway, the one I used to avoid when I came home feeling small, overlooked, like I hadn't done enough to be noticed. I looked at my own reflection, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a woman I recognized. Not just a federal judge, not just a sister who survived years of subtle dismissal. I saw a woman who had built a life from the inside out, with no applause, no spotlight, and no need for permission. Chelsea's voice no longer lived in my head. Not her laughter, not her judgments, not her need to shine at my expense. She would go on performing, go on smiling for the crowds, but I didn't live in her shadow anymore. And maybe she'd learn from that night, maybe she wouldn't. But I wasn't waiting around for her to understand the weight of what she'd done all those years. I didn't need her validation. I never really did. I walked into my study and sat at my desk, the files from the case Ethan's firm was working on still in a neat stack beside me. I didn't pick them up right away. I just looked at them, at everything they represented. Power, truth, justice. Things I had worked for in silence, with nobody watching. Things that were mine now, fully and without question. They tried to make me small. They tried to reduce me to a punchline, but the truth stood taller than all of them. And I didn't rise in anger. I rose in quiet, steady grace, because the loudest thing in the room had finally become my silence.